Oh my God, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, both of you.
One of the questions that has been suggested to us to ask, because we obviously ask our fans, etc., what we should talk about is colonialism and Africa. This is something you talk about a lot. Is Africa poor because of colonialism?
The only sensible answer to this question is absolutely colonization played a big role in making sure that the people of Africa remained where they were. And not only that, it was done on purpose, especially when it came to places like South Africa, where they basically turned the majority population into the mules of society, making them basically have slave wages.
Resounding no. It's not.
A resounding no. So they played no part in making Africa poor. That's interesting.
I mean, think about it. People like, when you line up, you could line up 100 people, African, non-African, doesn't matter. And you start asking questions and you might probably get 100 different answers, but you can pretty much categorize. I told you, English is only meant for my fourth language.
Yep, a lot of people on YouTube who only speak one language will criticize a lot of Africans for speaking one language like this. But, we speak like 4 different languages on average, so don't worry about it.
It's a word I don't know how to pronounce. Yeah. You can put it into categories, let's say that. And some people anywhere, so the people who are, some people will be like on the IQ thing, lazy thing, that whole racist trend of why Africans are where they are today. And then you have, and then you have...
You sounded like you've done a lot of research into this.
I grew up in South London, mate. I've met
right? And so on the other end, you have Africans and their allies, so-called allies. And for them, it's all various forms of victimhood, anywhere from it's because of racism, it's because, we've been colonized, it's because they're stealing our natural resources. You hear all of that.
Which is absolutely happening, which I can already see which direction this is heading, which is that Africans have to take responsibility for their own countries, which they already have. I mean, there's a lot of prosperity within Africa, but in order for them to grow, it's not just going to take a bunch of good businessmen. I mean, if you look at other countries that develop businessmen, where do they go to? They go to these European countries and leave their own. Look at India.
Yet, I don't hear anyone talking about what's the reason why we're still poor. And so, what do I mean by that? Think about it. We are talking about poverty. You asked me the question, is Africa poor today because of colonialism? You said poverty. You didn't say anything else. Poverty. What's the solution to poverty? Isn't it?
If we look at the world, there's several different approaches to ending poverty in different regions, depending on how you approach it. I mean, if we look at America, Canada, Europe, Japan, China, Singapore, and many other countries, they have their own ways of doing it.
Prosperity. It's not poverty alleviation. Like this idea that I should just be happy being a little bit less poor, but it's pathetic.
I agree with her here that the idea that Africans should just be happy at the station that they're in, and that if you come to Africa, you'll see great smiles when they're poor. This is just some TV stuff that people say, especially when they're trying to sell you something. So I agree with her that we should not be happy with poverty. I mean, everybody around the world is trying to make money, and they make money and use it against us. So why don't we get a lot of it in order to defend ourselves? While according to her, it's not being used against us, but in my opinion, it is.
So the solution to poverty is prosperity. Then who and how do we build prosperity? It's entrepreneurs, right? Traditionally, any nation that you look at, it's entrepreneurs that did it.
While I agree with her that we need way more entrepreneurs in Africa, we also have to take into effect that there's a lot of people trying to be entrepreneurs in Africa and failing. And the failure rate is not going to help alleviate poverty, especially if you take the fact that a lot of the entrepreneurs in Africa are untrained, not just in entrepreneurship, but in anything.
Well, what do entrepreneurs need in order to thrive? They need an enabling business environment.
I think the internet has proved that a business environment is what people need, because you can see how if you lower the entrance, then more people will give it a shot, more people will fail, but more people will succeed, and the world will be better for it. But there's also an education element of it, which she's not mentioning.
And we find that actually business countries that offer their citizens a world-class business environment are rich.
I completely agree with everything she's saying at this point, that African countries need to make it easier for people to start businesses and sell throughout Africa with each other and internationally and stuff like that. Have a great platform for other people to work in business and stuff like that. But I don't know what this has to do with if colonialism played a negative role in Africa, yes or no. I think this is almost completely dodging the question. It's like asking if you getting abused by your parents as a kid is the reason why you're sad today. And they say, well, you could always feel better by doing happy stuff right now. It's like, well, you kind of still have to address the fact that you were abused as a kid.
Conversely, those who offer a pretty bad, poor business environment don't thrive.
You're
And it
talking
makes
about
sense.
corruption.
Well, no, not exactly corruption. It's a pile of different things. So I could walk you into all of this. For example, take my country, Senegal. When I started my first company back in 2003, so at that point, when you wanted to start a company, you have to register the business first of all. How long would it take back in the days? Almost 2 years to register the business legally. And you look at that and you thought about the sister company, because I always have two companies, one in Africa and one in the US, they're sister companies. And to see that one almost took 2 years, the other one barely 20 minutes to put together. In this instance, you're married to your employees for good or for bad. Over here, employment at will, and so on and so forth. It's about everything like that. Everything. If I want to hire you, if I want to hire you, Francis,
Yeah.
the deal is simple. I show up, we write a contract, done. You put it in your drawers, I put it in my drawers, we're done. But in Senegal, I want to hire Constantin. We're over there talking to each other. I had to get a contract in 3 examples. Take myself physically to a government office called Inspection du Travail, where there we meet with a government official who doesn't know the first thing about my business, probably never ran a business in his whole darn life, probably maybe never was in the private sector, has no idea what we're doing, doesn't even know where we are, but this person gets to decide if Constantin and I get to work together or not. And he says, well, where is his health certificate showing me that he is apt to do the job? See, this type of nonsense, when you put all of this together, that's what the economists call economic freedom. And that's also what we call the business environment. Technically, how free or not are you to enterprise? How free or not are you to run the business? And so when you realize that Africa is the region in the world that's the most overregulated region in the world, that's the one that offers its entrepreneurs the least freedom to enterprise, then you understand why we're poor.
Funny enough, first of all, I know nothing about Senegal, but funny enough, everything that she said does kind of ring true in some senses, that people need to develop better business environments in order to foster better business practices, especially entrances and startups and stuff like that. That I will not disagree with. I just don't know what this has to do with her original point about colonialism. Sounds like she should be talking to the governments of Africa. I don't know anyone who would take this message seriously, starting from this antagonistic point of saying that colonialism doesn't matter. I mean, I know some people won't care about colonialism. I think if you're going to start a business, you can't be thinking about colonialism. You should probably be thinking about your business and how you're going to grow it. But at the same time, I don't know then why is it being introduced into this conversation? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Poverty solved by prosperity. Prosperity built by entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs need a business class business environment. It happens to be that in Africa, they have the worst business environment in the world. You haven't looked there, and you want to sit there and scream about all of these so-called reasons as to why we're supposedly poor? Give me a break. Give me a break. So this.
Now, I know some Americans watching this are not going to understand the slip that's happening here. First of all, most Africans do not blame modern poverty on colonialism. They blame the historical poverty of Africa on colonialism. They do blame some of the blockages on the basically the corruption that's happening outside, or the evils that are happening outside, that there's some blockages and some things that are bad, but everyone in Africa is pretty much aware that there's stuff happening in here that we need to change ourselves and all of that. And so this is sort of framed in a American debate point of view, where for some reason Africans themselves are being attacked.
This is what we have found, and that's what we need to work on, and no one is working on it, because those 100 people I told you about, you line them up, you ask them why we're poor, none of them speaks about the shackles that are around my neck as an entrepreneur trying to do business underground. Good luck with that.
She's right. No one speaks about the regulation and all that other stuff that's keeping her shackled in Africa, except literally every single person who is affected by these regulations, and the regulators themselves, who are trying to find a way to get rid of some of these regulations without completely destroying some of the laws they've created.
African business environment is highly regulated. Here to discuss how onerous regulations impact businesses and the economy is CRA analyst Gerbrand van Heerden. Firstly, what does the South African regulatory environment currently look like?
So South Africa has always been a difficult place to do business in because of our regulatory environment. Our government loves to regulate and legislate. And over the years, there have been a number of unnecessary legislation and regulations proposed and implemented that make it difficult for businesses to operate successfully in this country. A recent example is the Draft Companies Amendment Bill, which has been approved for public comment at the end of 2021. The draft bill introduces a number of onerous compliance requirements on businesses, including expecting firms to disclose the pay gap between directors and workers. A lot of
Yes, so it is true what she's saying, that it's bad, the regulation that's being put, and the fact that other countries keep inspiring Africa to keep adding more regulations. But I don't know why this video is being put with colonization at the same time. I mean, we clearly see that other people talk about it at the same all at once, but I think too many people are using this colonization as a way of, I don't know, publicizing this issue, which maybe is not a bad thing, but at the same time, we should not throw away historical things just so that we can get an argument out there that we should change, stop being so, I don't know, hawkish about regulation and stuff like that, which I agree. I mean, Africa is has problem with over regulating businesses, making it very difficult for people to start. In fact, a lot of businesses you'll see that are successful will be, I mean, to put it in a weird way, corruptly placed, where people will be related to that guy and all this other stuff, and then you have to, like, you can still succeed, but you have to dig out of a real deep hole in order to get to where you were. I could talk about people even in my own family who found it very difficult to run their own businesses because of grades they had in high school.
Why is it so overregulated, though?
Because once upon a time, we drank the fateful, ill-advised, dreadful, deadly ideology of socialism. And
some things about socialism are good, especially when it comes to social programs, but again, a lot of these things that have been put in, these boundaries that have been put in, are as a result of over socializing. So I do agree with her on some level, but again, what does this have to do with colonization, except the fact that, you know, where did this idea of socialism come from? Did Africans invent it, or did it happen to be that socialism was one of those things that were acting as an colonization mechanism, and so a lot of African countries that didn't want to be colonized gravitated towards socialism. And now, because it helped in part of the alleviation from that colonization, they find it hard to get rid of without feeling like they're throwing away an important component. Remember, I played you a video from Botswana or Namibia where that guy was fighting against other socialist factions that came into Africa and wanted, and then even though he won, he still wasn't praised, because even though the country became a democratic capitalist country, he still wasn't praised because the ideas of socialism was still strongly held by a lot of people. But again, this is not, I don't get why this has to do with not blaming colonization for a lot of things. It's part of the history, it's just real.
We'll try to describe here what socialism means, because our friends who feel victimized all the time, and our young people who think socialism is a good idea. For them, when they think about socialism, it's just like, oh, everybody's provided for what they need and all that. But no, it's, the government owning, the means of production. So, or when the economy is completely planned from the top down. So what happened, Francis, is...
Again, in this global world, I agree with her. There's no way you're going to succeed with something like socialism. Even if you were to fully make it work in your own country, it would be defeated after a while, because there is a bigger market which needs bigger demands and more efforts in the system.
When we got out of slavery, we got into colonialism.
I'm just going to say I have no idea what she's talking about. When we got out of slavery, we got into colonialism. Part of slavery was colonialism. The whole thing was colonialism from the get-go.
And towards the end of colonialism, what we had...
Okay, there's way too much disrespect going on. Don't put colonialism in quotation marks. It was legit colonialism, something that they were proud of. They were proud that they colonized Africa. They were proud that they colonized the kingdoms of Congo. They were proud that they colonized Rhodesia, that they colonized South Africa, that they colonized all these places and gave them their own names, and were basically draining them of their resources and giving nothing to the people who were the majority of those regions. So to put it in quotation marks and make it sound like it's something small or funny is very disrespectful. Even though I do agree with her general point that obviously we have to focus on today more than just the past.
Was the liberators of Africa. So all over the continent, we had various people fighting for, the freedom of their nations. And so what you had is around right before the independences in the late 50s, early 60s, what you had was basically, you were, for people who know their history, we were at the height of this ideological battle. On one end, represented by the Western nations practicing, capitalism, and what they were promoting was freedom, facing off with the Eastern Bloc, promoting various forms of statism. Mm-hmm. And both blocs were looking for influence, usually looking down south. And so we were no different. They were looking for influence with us as well. And so that's when our people, especially many of these liberators of Africa, they're thinking, okay, the West is who colonized us. Whatever they're standing for, we cannot be for. And they threw the baby out with the bathwater. That's when we made the fateful decision to side with the Marxist socialists of back then.
That's basically true for a lot of it, but there is a lot there that is being undermined or not looked at properly. But, basically there is a lot of truth in the way she accounted that history.
That's how, as most African nations were starting to become free, most of these leaders were also socialist leaders. And as you know, this thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. You just don't be like, oh, I'm a socialist, and it doesn't show anywhere else. So everything is following, the socialist ideologies. Basically, all of these, what do you call them? These 5-year plan a la Soviet style. That's what almost all African nations had. And then some people were like, well, Nigeria was not social. Well, Nigeria still was doing a 5-year plan a la Soviet style. And so this is what happened to us. And we, to this day, have not reconsidered any of this. any of this. Because when I go and this gentleman is telling me you have to bring me your Constantin's health certificate, and I'm asking where is it in the law, and they open it and I look at the date and it from the colonial times. So yeah, this is how we became.
I don't know if she realized what she's just said right there. She said literally the thing that's affecting them negatively is going and following a law from colonial times. So it's not because of colonization, but them following a colonial law is what's resulting in bad things. Make it make sense, people.
Socialist, but no one sees that today because what the world sees is it's so funny because I talk to people even on the right and they say, what do you mean? Africa is this lawless land. So for most people, there's no law going on in Africa. It's like every man for themselves. And my fellow Africans also feel the same way because they'll be like, what do you mean that Senegal and in general Africa is the region in the world where the employees are the most protected? I'm like, yes, on paper, this is the region of the world where employees are the most protected around the world. And they're like, which Africa do you live in? Because the
Actually, a lot of Africans are at least aware of the general idea that there's a lot of laws around starting businesses in Africa. That's why so many of them don't, which is kind of what you were initially saying about Africa. So it's you got to choose, are they aware or are they not aware? Because if they're not aware, why aren't they blissfully creating businesses? Just blissfully unawarely creating businesses because they don't know, or they are aware and then that doesn't make sense in you saying they're unaware.
Africa I live in and I'm in every day, I see people who have not been paid for 8 months. I see people who are treated like crap at their jobs. I don't see protected people. I say, I'll explain.
There's a lot of stuff in Africa that functions very well. Now, I do know that I'm not going to be one of these people who pretends there's no problems in Africa because I have to show it as a positive place. Yes, there are a lot of people and a lot of places, even beacons like South Africa, which a lot of people look forward to as one of those great places in Africa to come and make money. Even it has people who literally work for some of the government services, and some of them were complaining that they didn't get paid for months and months and months. And we're talking about poor people here, people who have nothing, they can't afford to not get paid.
What you see is the result of us. On paper, I take my country. Senegal is one of the countries where the employees are the most protected in the world. How does it translate for us? We're one of the 25 poorest countries in the world. What people need to understand is the law is the law. If you make it an employee being super protected means there's tons of labor regulations that stand in the way. That at will employment that I get in the US, absolutely not over here. Because remember, the government gets to tell me when we can hire each other. When I need to get rid of you, even if you're stealing from me, the government has to sanction that decision. So the government makes a decision as to when and how much it's going to cost me to get rid of you, even if you're at risk. And then what does it mean? Most people don't want to hire people for.
Anyway, I think this video actually has some good points in it, but I'm going to have to conclude here because it just goes in circles over and over again. So I'll have to leave it there and say, well, there you go.